The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark.
Glory to you.
Jesus and his disciples set out for the villages of Caesarea Philippi. Along the way he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" They said in reply, "John the Baptist, others, Elijah, still others, one of the prophets." And he asked them, "But who do you say that I am?" Peter said to him in reply, "You are the Christ." Then he warned them not to tell anyone about him. He began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer greatly and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, and be killed, and rise after 3 days. He spoke this openly. Then Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. At this he turned around and, looking at his disciples, rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan. You are thinking not as God does, but as human beings do." He summoned the crowd with his disciples and said to them, "Whoever wishes to come after me must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. For whoever wishes to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake and that of the gospel will save it." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
My dear brothers and sisters, as was mentioned right before Mass in the announcements, we are implementing a few changes this weekend to the distribution of Holy Communion and to some of the procedures around Holy Mass. Many of them I suspect you're not going to notice, but a few I did want to speak about directly from the pulpit. Number one is that we will no longer have our paten captain bring communion to those around the edges, those who cannot come forward for Holy Communion. Rather, myself or Deacon Dan will come to you. I feel very strongly that that connection between our members who are struggling in some way, including physically, that connection between the cleric and their own self is very important, and we hope that this connection will help to better establish that and manifest that. So, just to be aware, those who are around the edges, please be aware that we have not forgotten you. Either Deacon Dan or I will come to you after the central aisle is concluded. Also, there are many within the parish, many who bring Holy Communion to their sick spouse, to their sick child, to their relative, or to their friend. This is a good thing. However, I also am concerned that at times individuals will come forward with the pyx that, quite frankly, I don't know who they are. And so for the security of the Blessed Sacrament, for the honor due to Jesus in the host, we're going to begin a new procedure. And that is, if you are a member of Transfiguration Parish and you are bringing communion to someone from your own home or a neighbor, would ask you to please check in the sacristy before Mass begins. And then to retrieve the host from Our Lady of Mount Carmel Chapel, you will be distributed the host after Mass. So rather than come forward with the pyx during Mass, please come to the Our Lady of Mount Carmel Chapel after Mass. It's been my experience in 12 years of priesthood, I know a vast amount of time, I know. It's been my experience that people feel pretty strongly about this, and at times they can feel as though these sorts of changes is a personal affront to their own piety. I want to assure everyone that is not the case. However, the honor and reverence due to Jesus in the Eucharist demands that we err on the side of caution rather than liberality. So I thank you for your cooperation and thank you for your understanding. Again, those who are bringing communion to the homebound will do so after Mass, immediately after Mass. Please check into the sacristy before Mass and come to Our Lady of Mount Carmel Chapel after Mass. My dear brothers and sisters, it's safe to say that Peter's having a bad day here. A bad day. Things begin great. As we hear in the Gospel of Matthew, today we hear from Mark. Peter makes the proclamation of faith, the kerygma. Jesus is Lord. You are Lord. And it is this rock upon which the church is built, the rock that is held by Peter and that is defended by Peter and by his successors. Peter, of course, is the first pope. So far, so great. But then, a few minutes later, he gets called Satan. That's a change of situation pretty quick, huh? But this is not the only time where Peter's fortune seems to change. His situation seems to be modified in a very quick amount of time. Remember the garden? The garden where Peter says so clearly, I will defend the Lord, and he does so with violence, brandishing a sword. Well, fast forward a couple of hours, and Peter is denying Jesus with curse words. I do not know the man. Later on in Peter's life, even after the resurrection, Peter is afraid of the Jewish crowds. And so he says that converts must still be circumcised, and he has to be challenged. He has to be challenged by St. Paul until finally he realizes the error of his ways. My friends, Peter's road to glory was not a straight one. It's not as though it's a straight trajectory from that little boat on the sea straight to the glory of heaven and the high altar of transfiguration. It's a long, winding road, 4 steps forward, 2 steps back, 5 steps forward, 10 steps back, long moments of languishing and doubt and concern and fear, and moments of great heroicism and virtue. It's not a straightforward narrative. And this is a source of consolation, certainly for me, and I hope for you as well. Peter's life of faith was a real journey, a pilgrimage that again was not always direct or straight or heroic or noble. There were moments of betrayal, moments of sin, moments of cowardice. And still Jesus was faithful. The Lord still calls Peter from his littleness to the greatness that he is called to. Peter was not made of granite. He was made of flesh and blood like you and like me. And my friends, that is cause for rejoicing. It's not as though in our life we have one grand test, and if we fail, we're doomed. No. We have a lifetime of striving to say yes to Jesus, to say yes to him, to being formed, to being shaped. And this must be a source of consolation for us, especially when we fail and when we fall. And the devil says to us, you'll never make it. You've tried again and again and again. You'll never make it. Mediocrity is for you. Mediocrity. Get to Mass on Sunday when you can. Come to confession whenever you can make it. You're basically a nice person. Come on. Heroicism, sanctity, not for you. Or perhaps even worse, the devil may call up to our mind all of our failures, known and unknown, and he will say to us, the Christian faith itself is not for you. You are not for this. This is an unreasonable expectation. You are not capable of this. We become discouraged and we fall away. I had a wonderful confessor in college, a cranky old Dominican, Father Bart Della Torre. And I still rely upon the advice that Father Della Torre gave to me in that box of mercy. In fact, I would say that if you like what I say from this pulpit, it probably came from Father Della Torre first. And one line that will always stick with me among many is that discouragement never comes from God. It always comes from the devil or from pride. We think we're farther along than we are. Now, my friends, discouragement is not the same thing as being realistic. Sometimes things just aren't working out, and we have to acknowledge it. Sometimes our efforts are not of God, they are of ourselves. And we have to be willing to take a moment and pause and think, boy, maybe this is the wrong path altogether. But in those situations where we know God is calling us, the reconciliation that we are called to, the life of prayer that we are called to, the life of discipline that we are called to, in these areas, despite our failures over and over and over and over and over again, the Lord still calls us. He still is faithful. Like Peter, he still waits, knowing that with grace, even we can be saints. Even we. My dear brothers and sisters, let us look to Peter, the Pope, who was called Satan. Let us look to this brother of ours who looks an awful lot like us. Zealous, fearful, faithful, quivering. Let us look to this man who is a man made of flesh and blood, but still chosen by God. A God who knows full well what he is, who he is, and chooses him all the same. Let us reflect upon the humanity of Peter. Let us reflect upon the gratuitous mercy and patience of God. And let us begin again, and begin again, and begin again. Confident that God never tires of forgiving, even when we tire of asking for forgiveness. Let us strive to rise again and to follow the Lord wherever he calls. All of us are works in progress. May he continue to form us and to shape us. And may we not be discouraged when we say no to God, for he will keep asking.